Good morning, everyone. So welcome to this session on estimating the social returns to education. So my name is Suncica Vujic. I'm professor of applied econometrics and labor economics here at the University of Antwerp at the Faculty of Business and Economics. So my talk today will have two parts. One part will be really introducing our brand new Bachelor in Socioeconomic Sciences. And the second part will be what we call a trial lesson, where I will give you an example lesson of what I would normally teach within my courses of labor economics and introduction to econometrics, and later on also applied econometrics. So I will make a mix of these three courses and give you a taste of it within this trial lesson. So this week you've seen a lot of my colleagues and you mostly attended different presentations in Dutch. So I understand, and this is the first presentation that you're going to listen to in English. So I will try to speak in a slower rhythm. So if there are any things you don't understand, if there are any words that pop up that you're not familiar with, you can always ask a question. You can raise your hand. So you have a feature on Blackboard where you can raise your hand. You see, I'm now raising my hand. So you can ask a question by actually turning your audio on and asking a question. Alternatively, you can use the chat box, like some of you wished me good morning. So you can also use the chat box to pose questions or comments, and not just in relation to English words that you might not know, but also in relation to what I'm going to talk about. Okay, so without further ado, let us start. So my first slide is really going to introduce myself. So as I said, I'm a professor at the Department of Economics at the Faculty of Business and Economics. I joined Antwerp in October 2014. So I've been now living for about 7 years in Antwerp. And prior to that, I worked in the United Kingdom, in Bath and in London. Prior to that, I lived and worked in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, where I also did my PhD. And prior to that, I did my Bachelor in Economics, and I grew up and I was born in former Yugoslavia, now Serbia, in Belgrade. So my name might seem unfamiliar to some of you, all these accents that I have on my different Cs. So in my email signature, I actually give a bit of hint how people can pronounce my name. And this is a challenge, first challenge that you might face when you meet me. And it's a challenge also for my colleagues, not just young people like yourself. So if you're more interested in who I am, what I do, I provide a link. So you can go on my web page, and you can also find out what I do in terms of research, what kind of project I'm running, whom I'm working with, which kind of courses I teach, and so on. So you can actually find quite a lot of information about me if you're interested further about my profile. Okay, so that's about me. So yes, Lothar also posted my profile link in the chat. So let us then move to the program itself. So this trial lesson is part of the new English Bachelor in Socioeconomic Sciences program. This program is going to be organized for the first time in academic year in 2021-2022, and it's going to be taught in English. So the novelty of this program is that it's for the first time the Bachelor in Social Economic Sciences will be organized fully in English. And this is quite unique. So I don't know how many of you actually looked up English language bachelor program in Belgium, and actually not that many. So we are joining, we are basically joining the pool of a few bachelor programs in English taught in English in Belgium, which you could potentially study. So this is a unique multidisciplinary study program. So what does it mean, multidisciplinary? Well, it means that it combines different disciplines such as economics, business, and sociology. So you are going to develop competencies related to socioeconomic policy, business, economics, sociology, mathematics, and statistics. So it gives you a very broad education, very broad competencies, and after that you will be able to work in a variety of different domains. So how does it look like? So you probably saw the structures of different programs, bachelor programs that you might be considering starting next year. So in the first year, you will get a broad curriculum. So it will be a same program for everyone, and you will get an introduction to several different fields. And the idea of this first year is that you discover what you're interested in, where your interests lie. Because in the second and the third year, you can then pursue what we call a major. That is, you can specialize in one of these three fields of economics, business, and sociology. So this first year really gives you a chance to taste, if you want, the buffet of different introductory courses, which should really inform you and which should enable you to see what your interests are. So what is the best match for you to pursue further in the second and the third year. So if you ask yourself, so what are these three majors? So what type of courses I'm going to encounter in these three majors? And I give you here a flavor of some of the courses which are taught within these three programs. So economics has topics like micro and macroeconomics. And I know that some of you might have attended the introductory or trial lessons of my colleagues who could introduce you to these topics. So then economic policy, international economics, and very importantly, all these courses rely on solid knowledge of mathematics and statistics. So you will see that nowadays, economics, even though it's a social science, it's very much rooted in, or the models that economists use are very much rooted on good knowledge of mathematics and statistics, which we will then deepen in the course like econometrics. So if you never heard of this word econometrics, it's because econometrics is rarely taught at high school level. It's something that you will encounter for the first time on the second or the third year of your bachelor program. And it's really this combination of economic thinking, economic theories, and mathematics and statistics applied to the data. So you would basically take these economic theories that you learned in other of these courses that I mentioned and try to empirically test them using economic or socioeconomic data and applying these mathematical and statistical techniques. That's why it's called econometrics. In some other social sciences, you might encounter the term of sociometrics, or to be more fair to all social disciplines, we could also call it quantitative analysis or empirical analysis, or even quantitative reasoning, if you want. But this would be an overall umbrella for all these different methods which use mathematics and statistics and apply them to the data from, let's say, economics or sociology in order to test, to prove or disprove some of these theories that you're gonna learn within these more theoretical courses. So this is about economics. Then business, you might be more familiar with business, and maybe some of you are thinking of starting your own company, so becoming entrepreneurs. So in the business major, you would have courses like business economics, management, marketing, accounting and finance, financial markets, and so on. So this, so the difference between economics and business is that business is really going to give you skills which are more applied to the economy in case you actually are thinking of maybe starting your own company. So this set of skills might be more useful in this domain. And then finally, we have the third major, sociology, which have courses like sociology, social policy, social demography, law, politics, philosophy and ethics, psychology, as well as qualitative data analysis. So when I mentioned econometrics and sociometrics, we are calling that quantitative data analysis. Within sociology, you can also have qualitative data analysis, which is maybe more present in sociology than in economics. So then there are also courses which are called integration courses, and these integration courses should really stimulate multidisciplinary reasoning, and basically they enable you to combine these different concepts that you learn, let's say, from economics and sociology. So for example, if you, after your bachelor in social economic sciences, you stay on to do a master in the same field, you would have something called a labor cluster. So within this labor cluster, you would learn about labor economics from the perspective of economics, and then you would learn about sociology of labor from the perspective of sociology, and then you would have this cluster integration course, which allow you to combine these two perspectives of the same aspect of labor and labor markets, and try to integrate them through, let's say, an empirical paper which you write using the data, using either quantitative or qualitative data analysis to combine these two sets of theories and apply them to the data, and really develop this multidisciplinary reasoning. So some practical information. This is a 3-year full-time program, so it has 180 credits. So if you ask yourself, what do these credits mean? So 1 credit is equivalent to 25 to 30 hours of study. And by 25 to 30 hours of study, we really think of both classes. So now we are in this special situation, these Corona times, and most of our encounters are online. But we really mean, so this would be the class time, so where there is an interaction between the students and the professor. Then you also have your study time, because some of you are very good at, let's say, absorbing everything I say right now, so you could immediately repeat or as I say, absorb, adopt everything I'm going to say in this 1 hour. But some of you maybe need some more study time. So some of you maybe need to read this again, either from my slides or from the reference literature. So you need to allow yourself study time. And then at the end, there are also exams. So there's also exam time. So all these 3 activities combined actually mean hours of study. So this is what we mean by 25 to 30 hours of study. So it's a combination of class time, study time, and exam time, if you want. So academic year starts normally at the end of the September. It runs until end of May, and that I mean class time runs until approximately end of May. Then you have exam period. So exams are usually in January after the first semester. and in June after the second semester. So you see your class time runs until May, but you still have to finish exams in June. So if you take this logic into account, then the academic year really extends until end of June. And in case that you're not successful in this first exam period, either January or June, you always have a chance to, as we call, resit an exam. So you always have a possibility to resit any of the exams that you were not successful in January or June in the resit period. So if you ask yourself if you went to any of the trial lessons of the Dutch Bachelor Socioeconomic Sciences program, and you might ask yourself, so what are now the differences between this English versus Dutch program? So the differences are actually very small. So the English program will largely be the same as that of the Dutch Bachelor Socioeconomic Sciences program, with the difference, obviously, that all subjects will be taught in English. So I think it's a huge advantage to be able to follow classes in English in your own country. So you don't need to go abroad, at least not when you're very young, because being 18 to 21, you're still quite young from my perspective. So you don't necessarily need to go abroad to follow an education in English. You can actually do it at home. And I think this is a huge advantage. So second difference is that in the Dutch Bachelor program, we have maybe a focus on Belgium. So because we are in Belgium, and now what the international program will give you, it will give you more of the international perspective. So some of the examples focused on Belgium will now be broadened and will give you a broader perspective or international perspective in this English Bachelor Social Economic Sciences program. So that's the second difference and advantage if you want. So you get also Belgian perspective, but you also get an international perspective. And the third big advantage, and I would like to stress this, is that your class will be very international. So you will have colleagues not just from Flanders, but also your Wallonian colleagues might join, and also students beyond Belgian borders. So you really will be facing an international classroom, and you can start building these international networks already in the auditorium. So whether a physical auditorium or the Zoom or Blackboard Collaborate or any other online platform. So this is really, again, a huge advantage. So you will be exposed to international classroom, being, if you want, at home. So you can still live with your parents if that's what you prefer. And when you go to the university, meet international students. So these are the three main differences, if you want, between the English and the Dutch Bachelor Social Economic Sciences program. And finally, you might ask yourself, okay, so what can I do after this program? Where can I go? And you can go to many places or many directions. So one opportunity is that once you finish this bachelor, you can enroll into one of our English master programs. And we have several English master programs in economic policy, business economics, or political science. So if you're a Dutch speaker yourself, so if you're proficient in Dutch, so for example, I'm not a native Dutch speaker, but I do speak Dutch. So in principle, I could also choose to follow a Dutch language program if I was let's say a foreign student in Belgium. So we also have a number of Dutch master programs you could also consider. So there's a variety of master programs that you could consider to follow further at the University of Antwerp. Obviously, you can also decide to go and study somewhere else, but since we are at the University of Antwerp, and since this is the week when we are trying to promote our own educational programs, maybe you want to consider what else we have on offer on our buffet, if you want, of educational programs at the University of Antwerp. And as the alumni of these programs, so as somebody who finishes this Bachelor in Social Economic Sciences, and if you don't want to study further, you can obviously find a variety of jobs as consultants, managers, academics and advisors who work for international NGOs, so non-governmental organizations. As I mentioned, you can do your own startup or join somebody else's startup. You can work in the government, in banks, in different consulting and accounting firms. So the palette is really quite broad in terms of the types of jobs you can apply for after these programs. After this program and any of the specialized majors that I talked about. So again, if you want more information about the course, about this program, you can follow the link. So I provide the link within my slides, but you can also go directly to the web page of the course, of the program. And you can find any other further information, also how you can apply online, and also some, you can also find some statements and opinions of previous students who followed the Dutch version of this program. And if you want to contact us, you also have an option to contact people who are behind the program, and you can also ask now any further questions. So you seem to be awfully quiet. So I'll try to run a poll to see why are you quiet. So let me see, how does this work? So you can answer just by yes or no. Or maybe I can ask a multiple choice question. Okay, so I'm starting a poll, so you can choose any of the options, and then we will see. Okay. Okay. I have nothing to ask. Okay. So most of you have nothing to ask, and so we have 17 answers. I have nothing to ask. We have one answer that my English is not that good, and we have 6 no responses. So as I said, I do speak Dutch. So if you are more comfortable asking, okay, I will answer that question. So if you're more comfortable asking a question in Dutch, you can also do that, and then I will. You can type it if you want. I will translate it, and I will then answer it in English for everyone. Yeah. So this one person, if you have a question and you are afraid of your spelling, and I can understand that. So I make mistakes in Dutch, so whenever I can, I switch to English. Although English is not my native language either, so Dutch would be my third or fourth language. So, but thanks for your responses. This was a fun thing to do. So I'm going to end the poll. So we have 18 answers, nothing to ask, and 1 answer about English. And 5 people who didn't answer anything. So now going back to this one question. On the website, it says that in this course, you would also be learning a language. Does that start from beginner level, or do you need to be proficient in another language already? That's a very good question. I'm not a teacher of the languages, so of any of the language courses. I just know from my own experiences when I was a bachelor student. So the best thing there would be to contact the professors who are teaching the language, and I think you have the choice of English, Spanish, German, and so forth. I would expect that this starts from a very basic level, that you are not expected to be fluent in any of these languages, but I also suspect that the pace at which you learn a language at the university might be faster than the one at which you learn the language at the high school, right? So you might, okay, so from the Dutch version of the program, some proficiency expected for English and French, but German and Spanish starts from scratch. So there's your answer. I suspect that French is the official language of one of the official languages of Belgium, and you all had French in high school at certain level. So the French cannot start from zero. Then German and Spanish do start from zero, and the similar thing with English. Well, I mean, I know from anecdotal evidence that people say that Belgian and Dutch speak English better than the English themselves. So you're quite exposed to English language through movies, because your programs in English are not dubbed; they are subtitled. So by the time you start university, none of you are really, most people don't really have a zero knowledge of English. They are quite good in English. Is it possible to study abroad for a semester? Yes, we do have exchange. So we have the Erasmus exchange, which applies to both of our bachelor and master programs. So there, I think the challenge is to find the right course abroad that fits your interest, and then to combine it with the program at home, because obviously you need to find one-to-one courses which would, so to speak, replace the semester in Antwerp with a more or less equivalent semester abroad. But yes, we do have Erasmus exchanges, so they are applicable to all the programs, so you can't exclude the program. So they are applicable at both bachelor level and the master level. Yes, so exactly for these exchange programs, it's important that we also have bachelor courses in English, because for every outgoing student, so for every student who goes abroad, we should have an incoming student who comes to Antwerp. And then incoming students are invariably not proficient in Dutch. So it's important that they can also have a variety of courses that they can follow in Antwerp. So that's also a value added of an English bachelor program, I would say. So let me see some other questions. Okay, yes, Steffi, you have a good point. German is also an official language, also, although not always taught in high school. So there you go. That's your answer. Is this sociology major more focused on statistics than the Dutch version, or of just sociology? I don't know what you mean, but as I said, the bachelor, the Dutch bachelor and the English bachelor are very similar. So I will, in my trial lesson, I will give you an example of something that I teach within the course Introduction to Econometrics. And this course is compulsory at both the Dutch and the English version. So there's no differences between the two programs. So you have the same set of compulsory and elective courses. So there's no difference that one is more quantitative than the other. The main difference is, as I said, one is taught in English, the other one is taught in Dutch. One is maybe more focused on, let's say, policies within Belgium and examples within Belgium, and the other will give you more international perspective. Okay, thanks. Thanks for this discussion, and thanks for jumping in. If you know more about, or if you read already the website and so on, information that I missed, please jump in. Okay, so let us start with my trial lesson, and this trial lesson might be a little bit challenging. You will see some formulas, you will hear some terminology that you might haven't heard before, but I try to explain it as plastic, as we say it, as possible, such that you get the main message of this trial lesson. So the research question that I want to answer and that I want to discuss with you today is, does education generate returns beyond individuals' own lifetime earnings? So let me try to simplify this. So in labor economics, so this is taught, so this research question is something which is posed within labor economics and economics of education. And I will mention, if we have time at the end, what is economics of education. Usually it sees in education as a financial investment. So why do you want to pursue additional years of education? Well, because additional years of education will increase workers' earning resulting from this additional year of education. So your decision to enroll into further education at this point is really motivated by what are your future options on the labor market. So by having additional year of education, this is what you're expecting, you will have better options on the labor market. You will actually have higher earnings than what your earnings would be if you didn't have these additional years of education. So this is what we call private rate of return to schooling, or private rate of return to education. Why is it private? It's because you as an individual actually gain most from this additional education that you are going to follow. At the same time, there's something called social rate of return to schooling. That is, your education is not just increasing your own private earnings, but basically it also contributes to the national income, which results from an additional year of education. Because you can think of that your additional education creates some value on the once you join the labor market, creates a value on the labor market, which will basically also accumulate. So if you accumulate all the workers, and will contribute to an increase in the national income. So this is a traditional way of looking at private and social rate of return to schooling. So and we really see education as a financial investment. So maybe this doesn't look at you, this doesn't seem to you at this point, but this is what you're doing, because you're investing your time, you're also investing your money for another 3 to 4 years instead of immediately joining the labor market. So you're investing in yourself in order that after these 3 years or 3+1 years, you will have better opportunities on the labor market. As I mentioned earlier, you would be able to do these cool jobs that I mentioned, and at the same time, you not only contribute to your own financial returns or financial well-being, if you want, but you also contribute to an increase in the national income, which results from this additional year of education. So when I say national income, I mean like gross domestic product, so the total production of one economy. So that is the standard approach. And this is where you will start in the courses of, as I said, labor economics or economics of education, where we teach theories that education is a human capital, or education is a signal. So you basically signal to the future employer your abilities. Now, so what does more recent literature actually try to also show? Well, it tries to show that education does not have only these what we call pecuniary benefits. So additional years of education are not only creating these financial returns, but actually there's a large literature showing that additional education also affects these what we call non-pecuniary benefits. So it means not just financial returns to education, but also there are other returns to education, other benefits of education. And what are these other benefits of education, which we can also coin social returns to education, because these are socially desirable outcomes, if you want. So there's a large literature that outside of the labor market, additional years of education also have an effect on crime reduction, on enhanced political engagement and attitudes in democracy, so propensity that somebody would vote more democratic, that it also improves health outcomes. And in particular, there's a large literature showing that additional years of education reduces teenage pregnancies, and the number of teenage pregnancies in a country, in a society, is an important indicator of health maturity or health status of that particular country. Education also affects lifestyle behaviors, such as more healthy lifestyles, more so doing more exercise, or maybe having eating patterns. So what you actually put on your table. But it also affects better marriage market prospects, because you can think that it's called actually sorting. So it's by having more education, you might actually sort yourself with a person who also has more education. So as such, you make like a better match in the long run. So education might actually affect also happier marriages in that respect. But also it is called assortative mating. So that's another term that you might haven't heard before. While you're at education or while you're at the university, you also might meet those significant others, which you would not meet if you didn't pursue these additional years of education. So you can see that outside of the labor market, additional years of education have an effect on a pool of these desirable, socially desirable outcomes. And that's why we say that education also have social returns to education, which are not often considered by individuals. So at this point in time, you're 17 years old, you're thinking what to do next, which education to follow. As I say before, I think you're mostly motivated by these better labor market prospects, but you don't really take into account that education will also affect these other your other life choices, which are very much socially desirable and very much will positively affect your overall life or life trajectories. So we say that education creates externalities. So these are, we call them externalities, not taken into account by individuals. And here I cite a sentence from my former PhD student, or I was in his PhD committee, Danny Mazrekai. He defended his PhD last year. So he actually cites that Eurofound puts the annual cost of school dropout in the European Union at approximately 100 billion euros, which is almost 1.1% of its GDP, so this gross domestic product that I mentioned. Thus, it is clear that high school dropout may not only affect an individual, but an entire society. So when we talk about school dropouts, we mean people who actually drop out of high school. So you are not there, you will complete your high school and you will continue studying further. But when we say school dropout, we really mean people who drop out of school before their compulsory school leaving age. So just I will run another poll just to see whether you are aware of this. So, do you know So my question is, do you know what is the compulsory school leaving age in Belgium? Or do you know until which age you compulsory need to stay in school? Okay. Well, actually, the compulsory school leaving age in Belgium is 18. So this means that you should stay in education up to the age of 18, and after that you might stop education and go into the labor market. So when we talk about school dropouts, we are actually considering people who drop out of school before this compulsory school leaving age. So doesn't that age depend on the domain you're in, like ASOB or TESO? So I don't know these acronyms because I haven't done my high school in Belgium. But okay, so Itamar, you want to say something?
Yeah, these abbreviations stand for the different types of education you can get here in Belgium. The ASO is the highest, and there are then TSO is lower that, and then you have BSO. BSO could be a place where you can learn a job like mechanic. So after you study directly, you can start in the practice and learning with a mechanic. And TSO is more mathematics based, so more science and things like that. And then ASO is more based on things like literature and more those things.
Okay, thanks a lot. Well, I'm happy that somebody actually, I could hear the voice. Excellent English, so I have nothing to worry about. So I checked yesterday, and the compulsory school leaving age in Belgium is 18. So you are obliged to stay at education up to the age of 18, and then it's a choice what you want to do. Okay, so I'm just wary of time, and I can see that I'm terribly slow. So, so the question of my talk is how to estimate these social returns to education. Why is it a problem, and what do we mean by estimate? So we use the term estimation, particularly in econometrics, when we want to actually estimate a relationship between, let's say, X and Y. In this case, Y would be the future wage on the labor market, and or any of these other socially desirable outcomes, and your X will be the years of education. So you might think, well, I mean, I can easily do some correlation between these two things. So I can correlate education with wages, or I can correlate education with some measure of crime, or I can correlate education with some measure of health. But yes, and you could do that, and you could even say, I expect that education will positively affect my future wages. This is what the theory says. And you can say that education might negatively affect my propensity to commit crime, and that's also true. But what we really want to say is, what is the causal effect of education on these future outcomes? So what happens if you increase, so if you take an individual from the pool, so if I take one of you from this pool of the class, and I force you, if you want, I mean, I don't have to force you, you all want to stay in education, but I force you to stay one extra year of education, and then how will this extra year of education affect any of these outcomes? In terms of, so either so if we measure wages, let's say as log wages, so by how many percentages these wages will increase due to this one extra year of education. And why is it a problem to establish this, not just correlational, but what we call a causal inference? Well, simply because both education and both these other outcomes are also affected by a wide array of other factors. And you can think of your ability, your persistence, your family background. And we usually call these other things, if you want, unmeasurable. Because in the data that we use to prove the relationship between, let's say, education and hourly wages, or education and crime, education and health, usually we have data on these measurable outcomes. So usually we use the data for different individuals in the society who have different levels of education and different indicators of these measurable outcomes, like wages, like crime commitment, like health outcomes. But we rarely have information about these, what we call unobservables. So the persistence, ability, family background. So it's difficult to draw this causal inference, because both of the X and Y, so both education on one side and this outcome of interest on the other side, are also affected by a range of these other unmeasurable outcomes. So I'll try to illustrate this in two ways. And I will use the graph on the left is from labor economics. So labor economics is something that I teach at the master level of different programs. And on the right-hand side, I will try to illustrate it using approaches from econometrics. So you get like a flavor of a theoretical concept or the theoretical exposition of this problem from the perspective of labor economics, and how do we deal with this from the perspective of empirical analysis, from the perspective of econometrics. So what is the question we want to answer? We want to answer by how much would the earnings of a particular worker increase if he or she were to obtain more schooling. And I will start exposition with thinking about these pecuniary outcomes, thinking about earnings, and then you can extend it further and replace earnings by any of these other socially desirable outcomes like crime, like health, like your exercise, or even a selection of a future marriage partner. So on the left-hand side, we have a graph where we have two individuals. So the graph is from the book of Borges on labor economics, and it has the name. So it has two individuals of Bob and Ace. So what do we see on this graph? So we see on the vertical axis, we see a measure of wage, and on the horizontal axis, we see years of schooling. So what we see is that, so suppose that to complete a high school, to get a high school diploma, you need to stay in education for 12 years. And so if you drop out of high school before completing it, so if you drop out of high school after 11 years, so it means that you're a school dropout. So you didn't complete a high school education, and this is the case of Ace. So Ace drops out of education after 11 years and earns the wage of somebody who is a school dropout. Okay, and then we have Bob. Bob finishes high school, so finishes 12 years of education. And if we look what happens to Bob, Bob earns the wage of somebody with a high school diploma. So you also see these two blue curves. So we call them a wage schooling locus. What does this mean? Well, it shows all the combination of all the combinations of different points of years of education and the acquired wage. But you also see that the Bob's wage schooling locus is above Ace's wage schooling locus. And you might ask, why is that? So one reason why Bob's wage schooling locus is above Ace's schooling locus is also because Bob is more able, so has more ability, more persistence, is hardworking, or has other unobservable characteristics which we cannot measure in the data. So it has something which is, so some people are better at studying than the others, some people are more able than the others, and that might be also genetically that might also depend on your genetical makeup, on your genetical background. So let's say that you're a policymaker who thinks, okay, I should really force this guy Ace to complete, you know, high school and really gain this additional year of education, because then Ace will also earn this wage of the high school individual. Well, that's actually not the case, because if Ace finishes additional year of education, Ace will move along his wage schooling locus. So if Ace completes additional year of education, he will actually earn wage of Ace with a high school diploma, and not the wage of Bob. So what do we have in the data? So the thing is, in the data, we don't have these counterfactuals, right? So in social sciences, it's very difficult to run an experiment. So it's very difficult to say, okay, I'm going to randomize among a group of you, and I'm going to give some of you these 12 years of education, and some I will force to finish education at 11, and then I will observe you in 10 years' time and compare your wages. So you can imagine already that there will be a lot of unethical issues about this. So running this type of experiments that you can run in exact sciences, it's very difficult in social sciences. I'm not saying they don't exist. They're called field experiments, but they're not that common. And particularly in this setup, it's very difficult to say, okay, we're going to randomly force some people to drop out of education, and some people we will let to finish education, and then we observe what happens to them 10 years after. So what do we have in the data? Well, in the data, we only have retrospective information. So we have retrospective information about different individuals who completed and did not complete high school, and we also have their historical data on their both years of education and their wages. So in the data, what we will see, so we will see this point of ACE, which is basically he has 11 years of education and earns the wage of a high school dropout, and we have the point of Bob, who completed 12 years of education and who has a wage of somebody with a high school diploma. So now what happens? So we can connect these 2 points, so we can get this line. And what do you see? Well, this line doesn't give you the wage schooling locus of either ACE or Bob. You also see that this line is much steeper. So what do we mean by steepness? Well, this is really the so if you want, this is the slope of the curve, and I will try more to be more fancy. So this is the slope of this curve. So let me see if this works. So this would be, okay, so this would be the slope of this curve, and you can see that the slope of this curve is actually larger than the slope of this curve or this curve. So essentially, if you just do a pure correlation between in the data, correlating education and wage, this is what you will get. So you will get a curve which has a much higher slope than the curve of Bob or the curve of ACE. So if you do this pure correlation, you will actually overestimate. We call it the coefficient that you estimate will be what we call upward biased. So you will actually estimate that additional year of education actually will produce higher wages than what this is the case, because we are not taking into account all these unobservable characteristics. We are not taking into account that ACE and Bob are different, not just because they have different years of education, but also because they have different ability. And this is where we need to use not just statistics techniques, so correlations are the terminology which you will learn in statistics. We need to go one step further and apply these different econometric techniques, which will allow us to estimate the causal effect of education on wages or any of these other socially desirable outcomes, taking into account these unobservables, such as your ability, such as your perseverance, such as, let's say, your industriousness, which might affect this relationship and which cannot be disentangled if we use pure correlations. So now I'm wary with time, and it's already 11:30, and I've been talking maybe for too long. So Lothar is not there. So do you have any questions? Do you need to be somewhere else after this meeting, after this lecture? So let me do another poll. Okay, so let's see. So I suggest for people who need to leave, you can leave, and for people who want to stick around, I'm happy to try to talk longer to finish this trial lesson. Is that okay? So if you need to leave to go to. Okay, so I will try to talk for about a half an hour more until 12, and then I will stop. So for those of you who need to leave, you can leave now. And thanks for being here. You can in these slides that will be shared. You also have my email address, so you can drop me any questions, and I will continue for those who can stay. So yes, you're supposed to see the PowerPoint. Don't you see it? So do you see if I move? So do you see? Is it moving? Okay. So some of you are not seeing it. Okay. So maybe it's something to do. Maybe you need to refresh your page, and then it will come up. So yeah, as I said, I will talk until 12. So for those of you who need to leave, please do. For those of you who can stay, please stick around. So I explained what the issue is and why we can't just use correlations, and we can't use correlations not just in the context of establishing the relationship between education and wages, these financial returns, but also if you want to establish relationship between education and these other outcomes such as health, crime, democratic voting, and so on. So what do we do in econometrics? So what you see in the right panel, you see something which is called Mintzer's human capital earnings function. So it's a function. I mean, you probably saw functions before. So what I'm showing here is nothing else. It's a function which on the left-hand side, so we call it a dependent variable, has a log wages of an individual. So you see this, there is an index I. So the log wages, so these are the hourly wages of an individual on the labor market. So let's say if you had this data, you would have here the wages of both Bob and Ace. So if usually you need more than 2 individuals in order to estimate this kind of function. So you need the whole pool of the individuals on the labor market. So we take a log wages. Why log wages? Because you can imagine that the wage distribution varies a lot. And if you take a log transformation, you actually stabilize these wage distributions such that so that the extremes of these distribution do not heavily pull on one or on the other side. Now on the right hand side, what do you have? It's a linear function. It's a linear in these parameters, beta null, beta 1, and further, which need to be estimated. And this is some measure of education. So usually we use a measure of education, we use years of education. And again, there's an index I. So these are the years of education by Ace and Bob. So Ace dropped out of school, he has 11 years of education, and Bob stayed at school and he has 12 years of education. And you would similarly have all these other individuals in your data which have different years of education and earn different wages. Then you can imagine that wage is not just affected by education. There are other factors that affect education. So these other factors will all be combined in this vector X. So I can expand this vector to include these other factors, but you can think of previous labor market experience. You can think of, let's say, industry sector. You can think of whether somebody works full-time or part-time. But you can also think of things like gender. And this is another topic that I tend to talk about in both labor economics and econometrics, is that actually there's a lot of differences in wages between equally educated, equal profiles, men and women, and this you can estimate or you can disentangle if you, in this function, also include wages. And then what you see at the end, you see an error term. So what does this error term mean? So it means that everything that you cannot include in this function, so everything that you cannot measure, resides in this error term. So we usually call it unobservable because you can't measure it, so it's in the error term. And you would expect that everything that's in the error term is not that important for explaining your outcome of interest. So in this case, wage, but it can also be this other socially desirable outcome. So you expect that all these, everything else that it's in the error term might, if you want, kick your function up or down, but it won't systematically affect it. So all these pluses and minuses of the error term will cancel out. And if that is the case, so if you actually included everything which is important in this function, then your beta, when it's estimated by a method called ordinary least squares, and this is what I'm basically starting introduction to econometrics at the third year, at the final year of this bachelor program, by explaining the ordinary least squares. So if this function actually includes all the important factors that might affect log wages, and if you estimate this function by ordinary least squares, so why do we need to estimate it? Because these betas, these coefficients are not known. So once you estimate it, you actually estimate the particular value for this coefficient. And then we say that this beta 1 has this little hat. So this beta 1 is rate of return to education. So what does this mean? This beta 1 should really estimate the slope of this curvature, and should be interpreted as by how many percentages these log wages will increase if you increase the education of this particular worker or this particular individual by 1 unit. So usually 1 unit of education is 1 year. So, and you also say that you keep everything else constant. So you draw conclusions, what we say ceteris paribus. So you keep everything else constant, and you only vary this one thing. You only vary this year of education. And this is then your rate of return to education, or looking at this graph, it's the slope of this curve. Now, what is the problem? Well, the problem is that we assumed that this error term is what we call purely random, that this error term doesn't have any other characteristics which might be important in explaining wages and which might also be correlated with education. And this is where the problem appears. This is what we call omitted variable bias, is these unmeasurable factors which are important for wages. So your ability, your industriousness, your genetical makeup, that's very rarely in the data. And now with all these privacy concerns, it's even more difficult to have such delicate information in your data. So you know upfront that even though if I compare two individuals with same years of education, they will be different, and even if I control for all these other characteristics such as gender, such as previous work experience, such as let's say whether they work part-time and full-time. So if I really try to compare two individuals who are as close as possible to each other and only differ based on education, they might actually be different also based on these unmeasurable factors, these unobservables, which will then, what I say, bias my coefficient. So instead of estimating the slope of this curve or this curve, what this function is estimating this slope. And you can see that this slope is much, much larger than the slope that I want to estimate. So we say that this beta 1 is biased. So it's actually larger in this context, larger than it should be, because we assign to education both effect of education, but we assign to education also effect of these other unmeasurable factors. So we estimate beta to be larger than it actually is. So that's why it's biased. And we also say that it's inconsistent. So what does this mean? That you might think, okay, if I increase my sample, if I include more individuals, if I have a larger sample such that I have more individuals, more education and more wages, so I increase the N of this sample, maybe this bias will disappear. But the answer is no. The bias is not going to disappear. And this bias is often called omitted variable bias. Because we omit some very important variables from this function. They are hiding here in this error term. And this error term is not then purely random. It actually has some systematic factors that affect both the wages and education. We then say that this education is then endogenous as opposed to exogenous. And this is I also explained further in the course of econometrics. But most importantly, this beta is biased. So it doesn't give us the answer that we are looking for. It actually makes us conclude that returns to education are larger than they actually are. And this is a problem. This is a problem. It's problematic, particularly if you're a policymaker who wants to use this number to, let's say, design some educational policies. So now I make this whole talk, and I'm still at the one outcome. This is a log wage, and I want to connect this whole story to these other outcomes, the social returns to education. Well, you can imagine that you just replace the wage here with a measure of crime or some indicator of health or indicator of democratic voting, and you can still have this omitted variable bias problem, and you can still solve it in the same way that you would try to solve it in the context of estimating Mincer's human capital earnings function. So I'm wary of time again, so I will then go to try to illustrate the application that I want to illustrate, and this is from a paper where we connect education and crime. So the paper is with my colleagues, Olivier Marie and Steven Machin. Olivier is in Rotterdam, Erasmus University Rotterdam, and Steve Machin is a quite well-known professor at the London School of Economics. And the paper was published in 2011 in Economic Journal. And it really illustrates this previous problem and the method that I'm trying to show you as a solution to the problem. So let us just see what the paper does. So it establishes a causal link between education and crime by looking at the crime rates of school leavers that were forced to stay on an extra year in British schools because of a legal change to the school leaving age. So that's why I asked you if you knew what is the school leaving age in Belgium, because if you look at the history of compulsory school leaving ages across different countries, you will see that this has increased over time. So I'm not able to run an experiment where I randomly select people who can stay on at education or drop out of education, but these changes in compulsory school leaving age laws they do exactly that. So if compulsory school leaving age has been increased from 16 to 17 or 17 to 18, this is exactly like it's called a quasi-experiment, because the policymakers are then forcing the whole cohort of students to stay on in education for an extra year. And you can then compare this cohort with the previous cohort, which had to stay at school until 1 year less. And then you can look at their future wages, or in this case, the crime outcomes in this setup. So this is really this quasi-experimental environment that we are going to utilize to solve the problem of omitted variable bias between education and wages, or education and crime, and try to estimate really the causal effect of education on these socially desirable outcomes. So if you're interested, actually, this paper got quite a lot of publicity. It has also been it has been covered by The Economist in 2010, so 1 year before the publication came out. And it's interesting. What you will learn in this course, you will learn how to estimate these causal effects. And you will learn this terminology, because like in The Economist, they couldn't talk about ordinary least squares and endogeneity and omitted variable bias and the instrumental variables estimator, because to general audience, this doesn't mean a lot. So this is like really something which is unfamiliar and difficult to swallow. So to the whole methodology, The Economist refers to as the paper uses a statistical trick to find a causal link between low education and crime. So you can see we are not magicians, we are not doing statistical tricks. We actually have very sound statistical techniques which we can use to estimate the causal relationship between education and log wages, but also between education and crime, education and health, education and fertility, education and democratic voting, and so on. I will only briefly say something about the mechanism. So you might ask yourself, why would education affect crime? Or why would education affect fertility or health? And usually there are different mechanisms in place. So in case of education and crime, you can think of the income effect. So the same income effect that is important for explaining the relationship between education and wages. You can think that education increases the returns to this legitimate work and raises the opportunity cost of illegal behavior. So what does it mean? It means that if you have more years of education, and if you decide to commit crime, you actually have more to lose. Because, you know, if you are caught and put in prison, then not only that you would not be able to do any legal activities, but once you come out of prison, you know, there will be a stigma, and it will be even more difficult to find a job in the legal sector. So that's why there is this indirect income effect that actually education raises the opportunity cost. So that's why we call it opportunity costs of this illegal behavior. So that's one mechanism. The second mechanism is really self-incapacitation effect. So simply, while you're at school, you can't do other things. So, and not just crime, but you are also, you know, because teenage pregnancies might not be a problem in Belgium, but they're a huge problem in the UK in comparison to other European countries, and it has been on the decline, but it's still, so the teenage pregnancies is one of the highest in UK in Europe, in the UK, in comparison to other European countries, for example. So while you're at school, you actually don't have time to do other things. So you don't have time to do crime. You don't have time to you also have other peers. So there is some sort of self-incapacitation effect. And finally, education also affects your preferences. You might be more patient and more risk averse. So there is a whole literature which shows that teenage fertility, criminal activity, smoking are risky behaviors often considered being driven by affective thinking. So focus on immediate feelings rather than cognitive thinking, a focus on long-term benefits and costs. So what does this mean? So actually, there's literature from psychology, and you can immediately see how this Bachelor of Social Economic Sciences combines expertise from different disciplines. So combines economics with statistics, mathematics, and now also insights from psychology. So there is literature in psychology which says that young people, that teenagers are more focused on immediate feelings, on these short-term goals, on, let's say, the fact that education might be boring. You know, you might need to sit through my lecture, and you might need to study, you know, for this exam, and this sounds kind of less appealing than being outside, being free, being with your friends, doing some kind of, you know, let's say fun riding, you know, when you break a car and you ride for a while and then you drop it somewhere. But it's a crime. I mean, it's a crime. So you might be more focused on these immediate rewards or immediate feelings from these, let's say, risky activities, than focused on long-term benefits of foregoing these activities at this moment. So maybe pursuing education at this moment, because in the long run, this will actually have much higher returns. And actually, education might reduce this time inconsistency problem by affecting actually your patience, making you more risk averse, making you more think more before committing any of these other risky activities. So this would be the underlying mechanisms for the relationship between education and crime, but you can also think of education and fertility, and education and smoking, and so on. So just for the sake of time, so I think you already realized what I'm going to do. So I'm going to try to estimate the causal effect of education on crime, where I'm going to use these changes in the compulsory school leaving age to proxy the measure of education. And this is called the instrumental variables approach. So basically, I'm going to use this change in the policy, which shifted the whole cohort of individuals to stay on education from 15 to 16 in 1973. And then I will compare, so I will look at these individuals, let's say, much later when they're in the labor market, and then compare their crime outcomes. And what I will show is that individuals who had to stay on this additional year of education actually were much less prone to committing crime than those who dropped out from school earlier. And to combine these things, to actually give the estimate a causal effect, I'm going to use this instrumental variables approach, where my instrumental variable is really this policy change. So it's a policy which works by separating cohorts of individuals in my data into those who are treated, into those who had to stay on in education, and compare them to those who dropped out of education. So I'm just going to show you some graphs. So you can see the graphs of two measures of education. So you can see on the left-hand side, so those with no educational qualifications, because when you stay in education until 16 in the UK, you can actually get a diploma. So those who stayed on until 16, you can see that the proportion of individuals with no educational qualifications just dropped. So this is cohort of individuals born in 1957 who was affected by this policy change. And you can see that the proportion of individuals who left education without qualification just dropped significantly. And at the same time, on this other graph, the measure of education is the age at which you leave school. So you can see that there was a jump, there was an increase in age at which school. So, so you can see here what is the age. So now it's 16, around 16. There's much more individuals who leave at 16 rather than before. And we also look at the discontinuities in crime. So we measure of crime is a conviction rate, which combines both property and violent crimes. So it's a conviction rate after committing these crimes. And you can see that there was a drop in crime around this discontinuity. And I show what would the crime have been if this change in policy, if this change in education did not have happened. So you can see that due to this drop, due to this increase in education, you had a drop in crime among the affected cohorts, and you see what would the crime trajectory be if this policy change has not happened. And this is really the gist of my talk. I didn't spend more time on the instrumental variables estimator per se because of the time shortage, and I will talk more about it in the course itself. But what I want to draw your attention to is that so this type of material is part of the economics of education and labor economics. Methodology itself I will teach within the course Introduction to Econometrics, which is taught at the Bachelor of both Dutch and the English version of the Socioeconomic Sciences course. And it's really important for policy evaluation because this type of analysis really tells you what works. It's called evidence-based approach as a guiding principle in education and policy practice. And by actually establishing a causal relationship between education and wages, or education and crime, or education and health, you're able to design policies or advise policymakers in terms of what works and by how much, let's say, education affects these outcomes.